Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here with us today. I'm Katie Earle. I'm the coordinator of our University Express program, and we're joined here today with Dr. Shauna Zorich. Hey, Shauna.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Of course, we appreciate your time. So, as Shauna's going through her presentation this morning, everyone, feel free to type in your questions and comments in that lovely Q&A panel that you're all so accustomed to using now. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can in the session. We'll take questions throughout, and then at the end too. So please feel free to type in anything as soon as you think about it. And quickly, we'll thank our sponsors, which is our Department of Senior Services, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Western New York, Celsius Orthopedics, and Wegmans for all their support. And Senior Services is at 858-8526 if you ever need anything. All right. So Shauna Zorich earned her BS in Biology from Canisius College and her medical degree in Masters of Public Health from the University of Buffalo. She's currently a clinical assistant professor in the Department of Epidemiology and Environmental Health at UB, where she teaches both undergraduate and graduate students in public health and epidemiology. Prior to her academic career, Dr. Zorich worked as a preventative medicine officer for the United States Air Force and currently holds the rank of major, and she's here with us today. Thank you, Shauna. The floor is yours.
Thank you for that introduction, Katie. I appreciate that. And hello to all of you that are joining us today. I'm glad to be able to be here to speak with you about vaccines. We are going to be covering quite a bit of material today, so I am going to jump right in. And so this is what we're going to be talking about today. We are going to be talking a little bit about the biology and the science of the immune system, so you can get a better understanding of how vaccines actually work. We'll talk a little bit about the history of vaccination, a little bit about the impact of vaccines, and then where we're going to focus most of our attention is on the specific vaccinations that are recommended for older adults, including influenza, pneumonia, shingles, and COVID-19. So let's start by just defining what a vaccine is. So a vaccine is any biologically derived substance that can elicit a protective immune response when given to a susceptible host. And that might sound like it has a lot of kind of scientific jargon in it, but I think it's going to become a little bit more clear as we talk about it in more detail. But I think what you can think about especially is that susceptible host is going to be a human like you or myself, or it could also be an animal. We have vaccines for animals as well. But what's going to be happening is when a vaccine is administered, it's going to stimulate the immune system to respond. And then we'll talk a little bit more about what's going on when that actually happens. But before we do that, there's a few definitions that are important to understand, as these terms will be coming up a bit throughout our presentation. So a pathogen is an agent that can cause disease, so like a viral agent or a bacterial agent. So SARS-CoV-2, which causes COVID-19, is an example of a pathogen. Or the influenza virus, the virus that causes influenza, is an example of a pathogen. So that's what a pathogen is. Now, an antigen is any foreign substance that can stimulate an immune response. And there can be many different types of foreign substances that can stimulate immune responses. Pathogens can certainly stimulate an immune response, but you can even, if you kind of want to think about it in simplistic terms, you could think about getting a splinter in your finger, and that splinter is going to be a foreign substance, and that foreign substance is going to tell your immune system, okay, this shouldn't be here, we need to respond to that. And so if you leave that splinter in your finger, you're going to start to see some redness, you're going to start to see some swelling, you might even see some pus start to accumulate. That's the immune system responding to that foreign substance. So again, an antigen is a foreign substance that's going to stimulate your immune system to respond. And then finally, we have antibodies, and these are special proteins that are made by the immune system to fight against the foreign substances. So when you are exposed to an antigen, your immune system is going to create antibodies in response to that. And those antibodies are going to fight off those foreign substances. So our immune system is responsible for protecting our body from pathogens. And we just learned the word antigen, and an antigen is a foreign substance that's going to stimulate the immune system. And so pathogens contain antigens. That's how our immune system, it recognizes those antigens, and it knows that that pathogen is not supposed to be there. And so that's what's going to stimulate our immune system to respond to those pathogens. So on the screen, you can see really simplistic drawings of a bacterial cell and a viral cell. But what I want to draw your attention to is the fact that you can see on the surface of the bacterial cell, there's going to be proteins, and on the surface of the viral capsule, there's going to be proteins. And what these are actually antigens, which can then stimulate the immune system. And so that's how our immune system is going to know, okay, these are pathogens, these are foreign entities, these are not supposed to be here, so we're going to respond to this. And how they're going to respond is they're going to respond by making antibodies. So in this picture here, what this is showing is this is a viral particle. And these Y-shaped objects here represent antibodies. So these antibodies are being created in response to that viral particle. And these antibodies are going to work to neutralize this pathogen. We want to get rid of this pathogen so that it can't invade our human cells and cause us to get sick. So what vaccines are doing, so you might be wondering, well, what does all this have to do with vaccines? So what vaccines are actually doing is they are actually mimicking pathogens. And not only mimicking the pathogens, but also the antigens that are associated with those pathogens so that they can stimulate the immune system. So wouldn't it be great if we could stimulate our immune system and get our immune system prepared to respond to a pathogen without actually getting sick? And that is what vaccines do. So they mimic pathogens and they mimic the associated antigens. And when we receive that vaccine, our immune system recognizes the mimic and responds by creating antibodies. And one thing that's really neat about the human immune system is that it's actually capable of memory. And so it's able to remember foreign entities that it was exposed to in the past. And so what happens with vaccination is you receive a vaccine. That vaccine is mimicking a pathogen. Your body responds to that by creating antibodies. And then your body is able to remember that previous exposure. And what happens then is if in the future you are exposed to the actual agent, your body is already primed to fight off that pathogen. And because your immune system is already ready and primed to fight off that pathogen, you don't end up getting sick. So your immune system is able to beat the pathogen. But if you didn't get that vaccine and your immune system was not primed and ready to fight off that pathogen, you may very well get sick. So that's really what vaccines are doing. So vaccines contain antigens. So remember, that's the foreign substance that's going to elicit the immune response. So our vaccines contain antigens, and it causes the body to respond by producing antibodies. And then since our immune system is capable of memory, the body remembers that exposure, and in the future, if you are exposed to the actual pathogen, your body is all ready to fight off that pathogen, and then you don't get sick. All right, so that's kind of the end of the section on the biology and the science of vaccines. Are there any questions yet, Katie?
One of the questions, well, the only question right now is, can you explain how a booster shot works?
Okay, yeah, so a booster shot works very similarly to a vaccine. Now, there's some vaccines that you only need 1 or 2 doses, and you're going to have a really strong immune response, and you're going to remain immune for life. So a good example of this is the measles vaccine. The measles vaccine, you get a vaccine when you're 12 months of age, and then you get another vaccine prior to entering school. And those 2 doses are going to be what you need for your entire lifetime. So it's going to provide you protection for a lifetime. Now, not all vaccines are able to do that. There's some vaccines, what happens is your immunity starts to wane over time. And so as you move forward in time, your body isn't able to respond like it could when it was, recently given the vaccine. So when we give that booster, what it does is it reminds the body, okay, this is the antigen, this is the foreign antigen, and then the immune system responds by creating antibodies. And then it basically reminds the body that, okay, this is a foreign substance and we need to fight this off if we are exposed to the real pathogen in the future. So boosters are really, they're the same as vaccines, but when it's called a booster, it's basically after you've gotten the initial series of the vaccine, but you're getting the vaccine again. So, I mean, I think maybe a good example is tetanus. So tetanus vaccine is something that once you get it, you're not going to be able to maintain that immunity for life. You need to get a tetanus booster every 10 years. And so, after about 10 years of time, it's been found that individuals can actually get tetanus. And so we need to boost the immune system and remind the immune system, okay, the tetanus bacteria is something that we need to fight off. So we remind the body that by giving a booster.
Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, so now just a little bit on the history of vaccination. So there's an individual by the name of Edward Jenner, who is considered the father of immunology. He was born in England in 1749. He trained as a medical doctor, and he conducted a really famous experiment, which I'm going to tell you about. So during Edward Jenner's time, it was a common belief that dairymaids were protected from smallpox. So dairymaids didn't get smallpox, but what they did get is they got an affliction that was a little bit like smallpox, but it's called cowpox. But cowpox is a much more mild disease than smallpox. And usually when the dairymaids would get cowpox, they would just get lesions on their hands. You can see this is a picture of a dairymaid with some cowpox lesions. So the dairymaids would get cowpox, but they wouldn't end up getting smallpox. And what Edward Jenner suspected is he suspected that the cowpox was actually protecting the dairymaids from getting smallpox. And so he wanted to test this out. He wanted to test this theory. So what he did is he took material from a cowpox lesion. So from a dairymaid, her name was Sarah Nelms. And what he did is he inoculated this material into an 8-year-old boy whose name was James Phipps. And as a result of the boy being inoculated with the cowpox material, he experienced a really mild illness. So he got a mild fever, some loss of appetite, but a very mild illness that was temporary, and within a few days he was fine. So then what Jenner did is 2 months later, he challenged James by inoculating him with material from a smallpox lesion. And what happened is that James did not develop smallpox. And so what this did is this helped Dr. Jenner prove his theory. Now, this was just one individual, and so this experiment had to be repeated on other individuals after this time. But what Jenner found was that if individuals were inoculated with cowpox and then later inoculated with smallpox, material from a smallpox lesion, they were protected from smallpox. They would have some side effects associated with the cowpox, like James did, mild fever, feeling a little ill, but wouldn't get smallpox. And smallpox is a very, very severe disease. About 1/3, one of every 3 people that got smallpox died of the disease. So, you know, having a mild fever and a little bit of illness as a result of the cowpox was something that many individuals were willing to do. And so what this really was, is this was really the first vaccine. The cowpox material was acting as a vaccine. So that cowpox was mimicking the smallpox. It was close enough to the smallpox that it stimulated the immune system to make antibodies. And those antibodies, because our immune system is capable of memory, they were already and primed so that when James was then inoculated with smallpox, his immune system was ready to respond, and it responded quickly, and it overcame the smallpox virus, and James didn't get sick. So this is our very first vaccine. And if you ever wondered where we got the term vaccine, it comes from the Latin vacca for cow. And so that's actually where the term vaccine came from, because our very first vaccine was made with material from cowpox lesions. Now, this is not something I expect you to be able to read. I really just included this slide so that I could show you how many vaccines have been developed since Jenner's time. So we've had dozens of vaccines that have been licensed over the years since Jenner first developed the smallpox vaccine. And, you know, at this time, we have 18 routinely recommended vaccinations, and they're listed here. Now, most of these vaccinations are administered to babies and young children, but there are some that are recommended for adolescents. There are some that are recommended for middle-aged and older adults as well. So your age can play an important role in determining what a sort of vaccine is appropriate for you. And so the vaccines that are recommended for older adults, we're going to be talking about those in a few minutes. But before we do that, I did want to just speak a minute about the impact of vaccination. And these numbers are probably small here, so you may not be able to read them. So I'll just describe what we're looking at here. So what these numbers are showing is it's showing the difference between the number of cases of vaccine preventable illnesses in the pre-vaccine era, so how many cases were seen before the vaccine was available, compared to how many cases are seen in the present time. So these numbers were actually taken from the year 2014. So kind of in contemporary times, after the vaccines have been available and being used, how many cases are being seen. And what we see is for many vaccine preventable illnesses, we see a 100 or 99% decrease in the number of cases of disease. So for example, a disease like diphtheria, we had in the pre-vaccine era around 20,000 cases of diphtheria happening every year in the United States. And then in 2014, there was 1 case of diphtheria. For measles in the pre-vaccine era, it was not unusual to have 500,000 cases of measles reported every year. And yet in the, you know, in contemporary times, we have hundreds of cases being reported instead of hundreds of thousands of cases being reported. Polio is another really important one. Polio was extremely feared disease, as many of you likely recall. And in the pre-vaccine era, thousands of children would come down with poliomyelitis, the type of polio that caused paralysis. But in contemporary times, we don't see polio in the United States anymore. We don't have cases of polio in the United States. And so it's just really the take-home point here is that vaccinations have had incredible impact in the number of cases of vaccine preventable illnesses, not only in our country, but across the world. So just one example is measles, and many of you may have experienced measles because the vaccine was licensed in 1963. So measles is really contagious, one of the most contagious infectious illnesses known because it can travel through the air. So it travels and spreads via the airborne route. And because it was so contagious, it was almost universally seen in children. So by the time a child was 15 years of age, 90% of them would have had experienced measles. And when a kid got measles, they would get high fevers, they would have cough and runny nose, they would get conjunctivitis or pink eye, and then of course kind of the full body rash that most people recognize. And most of these kids recovered, but a small percentage of them had complications, and some of the complications were really severe. And so when I talk about severe complications, I'm talking about things like inflammation of the brain, leading to seizures and even death. So, about 1 in 1,000 kids would end up dying from measles. And because there were so many kids getting measles every year, you had hundreds of kids that were dying from measles. Because a small percentage of them would have very severe cases. So what this graph is showing here is it's showing measles cases that were reported in the United States from 1950 through 2011. So the vaccine was licensed in 1963. That's what we're seeing right here. But prior to the vaccine being licensed, there was on average about 500,000 cases reported. Now there was many more cases that went unreported. So the estimate is that there's probably about 3 to 4 million cases of measles that were happening in the United States every year. But you can see that after the vaccine was licensed in 1963, there was this really sharp decline in the number of cases of measles. Over the ensuing decades, there were some resurgences. You can see those occurring here. You see these little blips, and those blips occurred because people became complacent and weren't getting their kids vaccinated, and the numbers needed for herd immunity, which I don't know that we're going to have time to discuss that, but basically herd immunity is kind of like a community immunity, and you need a certain number of people vaccinated in order to achieve that. Well, that was getting lost, and so you had outbreaks occurring, and that's what happened over the ensuing decades. But in recent times, the vast majority of individuals in the United States are vaccinated against measles, and so now we only see measles occurring in kind of very select populations where in those communities you have vaccination levels that are low. So a good example is what we saw in New York City just in 2019. That was the largest outbreak of measles we'd had in decades, and it happened in a community, a Jewish community, where vaccine levels were quite low, and so you ended up having hundreds of cases. And that year we had over 1,000 cases of measles in the United States in 2019, which was the most cases we've had in decades. But because the vast majority of the United States is vaccinated, measles is something that is very rare, and we're really only going to see in these small pockets of communities that have low vaccination rates. But that's why it's really important to keep making sure that kids continue to get vaccinated, because if those levels drop down, you would see outbreaks happening in other communities as well. Okay, so now we're going to get into discussing the vaccines that are recommended for older adults. Before we kind of get into this next topic, Katie, were there any questions?
There is a question. I'm not sure if you want to leave it till the end though, so let me just read it and then you can decide.
Okay.
So this is, how does lab work differentiate between antibodies produced by vaccine or from an actual pathogen?
So how does lab work differentiate between an antigen that's been created for a vaccine and the actual pathogen itself?
Yes.
So, I mean, I'm not a virologist, and I don't know a lot about the actual lab studies that are being done, but there's various ways that pathogens can be changed so that they are no longer infectious. So one thing that can be done is they can be just killed. So for example, you might use formaldehyde to kill a pathogen. And so it still actually has that antigen, but when it is exposed to a human body, the human body is not going to respond. It's going to respond. The immune system is going to respond because the antigen is there, but because the pathogen has been killed, the individual is not going to get sick. Another thing that can be done is the pathogen can be weakened. And so there's different ways you can do this, and that it's kind of complicated, but it involves kind of growing and passing viruses through different cell lines. And when you do this, you end up weakening the virus so that it doesn't grow well in the human body. And so we have some vaccines that are live vaccines, but the actual virus itself has been weakened. And so it stimulates the immune system, but it doesn't cause the person to become ill. So an example of this is the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, also the chickenpox vaccine. Those are live vaccines. And so what's happened is it's just been weakened. And then with some other vaccines, you actually take a part of the pathogen. And so you're not using the whole pathogen, you're just using a piece of the pathogen. So you're just using the antigen. And the antigen is the same as the antigen that you would see in an actual pathogen, but since you're just using the antigen, you're getting the immune system to respond, but you're not actually going to get sick as a result of being exposed to it. So I hope that answers the question. I feel like if I was a virologist or, working in the lab, I might be able to answer that question a little bit better, but there are a number of methods that are utilized to kind of take a pathogen and convert it to something that can be utilized in order to utilize it as a vaccine.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so the 4 vaccines that we're going to talk about today is the influenza vaccine, the shingles vaccine, the pneumococcal vaccine, and the COVID-19 vaccine. And these are all vaccines that are recommended for older adults. And if you're not sure which of these are recommended for you, there is actually a very helpful adult vaccine quiz that the CDC has posted on their website. So if you use the internet to do searches, you can use a search engine to find this. You can just type in, like say you use Google or Safari or whatever search engine you use, you can just type in adult vaccine quiz, And this will be one of the first websites that come up, and it asks you a few questions about yourself, and then it gives you the list of vaccines that you could potentially need to, that would be potentially recommended for you. You could take that list to your physician or whoever your healthcare provider is and talk to them about those particular vaccines. So just something to check out if you're wondering about what vaccines are specifically recommended for you. Okay, so the first vaccine that we're going to talk about is influenza, and many of you are very likely familiar with influenza. This is a respiratory disease that's caused by the influenza virus, and it can be transmitted from person to person via respiratory secretions. People that get sick with influenza will experience symptoms abruptly. They'll have symptoms like fever and chills. You can have respiratory symptoms like cough and sore throat. You can also have body-like symptoms like body aches. You can be tired. Some people will have gastrointestinal symptoms as well. So most people that get sick with the flu feel pretty cruddy for a few days, but then it will resolve for many individuals. There are some people that are at higher risk for more severe disease, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So influenza is a big problem in the United States. We see epidemics occur every single year, and they occur they start during the fall months, and we see cases typically peak in kind of the January, February timeframe. And then as we get closer into spring, you'll see cases starting to trail off. But every year we have epidemics, and between 5 and 20% of people get infected every year. So that's a lot of people. Influenza does affect a lot of people. And like I said previously, most people are going to do okay. Influenza, if any of you have ever had it, you know that it really does make you feel real cruddy. But if your immune system is capable of responding to it well, then within a few days, you'll start feeling better. However, there are people that will have complications associated with influenza, and so this is especially going to be seen in young children. It can also be seen in older adults. It can be seen in pregnant women and also people that have chronic illness. So those are the groups of people that tend to have more severe disease. And a result of this severe disease, we have hundreds of thousands of people that end up getting hospitalized in the United States every year because of influenza. And every year we also have tens of thousands of people die. And when we look at the people that are being hospitalized and we look at the people that are dying due to influenza, the majority of those individuals are 65 years of age and older. So this is something that is important for everyone in the United States, but especially for the older adult population because of the increased risk of hospitalization and death. So in the United States, we have an advisory committee that makes recommendations about what vaccines should be received by what individuals. And this committee is called the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, or ACIP. And the ACIP, it universally recommends influenza vaccine for all people that are 6 months of age and older. So the only people that it's not recommended for are very young babies. And another thing that's important to recognize about the influenza vaccine is that the influenza virus is constantly changing. It goes through these mutations. And since the virus itself is constantly changing, we also need to update the vaccine regularly. And so the vaccine is updated on an annual basis. And as a result of this, the vaccine is required annually. It is best to get the vaccine as soon as it becomes available in the fall, as it does take 2 weeks to have your immune system fully respond to that vaccine and be able to protect you from influenza. And like I said, this vaccine is going to be especially important for people that are at higher risk, like older adults, or especially residents of nursing homes and long-term care facilities where you might have influenza outbreaks occur. Okay, so in terms of specific recommendations for individuals that are 65 years of age and older, so if you are 65 years of age and older, you can receive any vaccine that's approved for this age group, as there are a number of vaccines that are approved for this age group. The CDC does not recommend a preference for one vaccine over another. So although there are many different vaccines that are available, the CDC does not recommend one over the other. They just want you to get vaccinated. There is one type of vaccine that individuals that are 65 years of age and older cannot receive, and that is the live influenza vaccine, which comes as a nasal spray. And so if you are actually that is only going to be administered to individuals that are less than 50. So you should not be receiving the nasal spray if you are over 50. And then there's a couple of influenza vaccines that are specifically manufactured for the older adult population. There's two. We have the Fluzone High Dose and we have Fluad. And the main goal of these two special vaccines is to stimulate the immune system even stronger than a typical vaccine would do. And there's two ways that you can do this, that they've two methodologies that they've used to create these vaccines that are going to stimulate the immune system more strongly. And with the Fluzone High Dose, it contains 4 times the antigen as a regular flu vaccine. So remember earlier in the talk we were talking about antigens. These are foreign substances that are going to stimulate the immune system. And if you have 4 times the antigen in the vaccine, you're going to be stimulating the immune system stronger just because you have a stronger concentration of that antigen. And so that is the methodology that's used by the Fluzone High Dose. The methodology that's used by the vaccine called Fluad is something called an adjuvant. So this is an ingredient that is added to the vaccine, which creates a stronger immune response. So there is an adjuvant in the Fluad vaccine. So they're both, the goal of both of them is to get the older adult immune system to respond more strongly. Older adults can have weaker immune systems and weaker responses to vaccines. And so in order to get them adequately protected, we want to make sure we have a strong immune response. And so that's why these special vaccines were created for the older adult population. There are some studies that have shown that these vaccines are more efficacious than your traditional vaccines, and that there's lower risk of hospitalization when someone has received one of these. But again, I want to remind you that the CDC does not recommend one vaccine over the other, and it doesn't even recommend that older adults get the Fluzone High Dose or get the Fluad vaccine. Again, they just want you to get vaccinated. But I do think that it's important to know about these two special vaccines that are available for the older adult population. So how well does the influenza vaccine work? Well, every year we have to check that, because since the vaccine is changing every year, how well it works also changes. And how well it works is going to depend on a lot of different things. And so how well it works can really vary pretty drastically from influenza season to influenza season. So if we look back to 2005, the efficacy of the vaccine has been anywhere from 10% to 60%. So really wide range. Usually we see it somewhere in the kind of 40 to 50%. When we look at the 1920 influenza season, it was found to be 39% effective for all ages. And so this meant that the flu vaccine decreased the risk of getting sick and going to the doctor by more than 1/3. So the influenza vaccine definitely doesn't have the efficacy that we see for some of the other vaccines that we're going to be talking about today. But in my opinion, this amount of effectiveness is going to prevent some people from getting sick with influenza, and it's going to prevent some people from getting severe disease and being hospitalized. So even though the effectiveness is not as strong as we see for some other vaccines, it's certainly better than nothing. You know, any protection that you can get for yourself is going to be better than no protection at all. So one myth is that the flu shot can give you the flu, and this is just absolutely false. This is not true. The flu shot cannot give you the flu. The flu shots that older adults are receiving, they're all killed virus vaccines. So a virus that's not living cannot cause disease. Now, you certainly can get the flu shot and then you can get the flu. So, you know, sometimes people might get the flu shot and then they get the flu within the first couple weeks and their immune system hasn't been able to respond. You know, the immune system hasn't had the time it needed to respond. It takes about 2 weeks until you have that full immune system response. So you might get the vaccine and then a week later get the flu, or you might get the vaccine and then you might get the flu just because the flu shot is not 100% effective. So it's not going to protect everyone from the flu. But if you get the flu shot and then you get the flu, it's not because the shot gave you the flu, it's because the flu virus gave you the flu. Now, another thing that can happen is people can get the flu shot and then you can have some side effects that are associated with the flu shot. Oh, and usually these side effects are mild. For most people, it's going to be things like redness or tenderness at the site of the injection. But some people can also get low-grade fever, can get headaches and muscle aches. So you may feel like you have symptoms that are consistent with the flu, but it's actually not the flu. It's just your body's response to the vaccine. And if your body's responding to the vaccine, that's kind of your message that your immune system is doing its job. But it's not the flu. It's just side effects associated with the vaccine. And the thing about the side effects is that they're very temporary. They tend to be very mild. Most people are going to resolve their side effects within 1 to 2 days. So just want to kind of set that myth to rest. There is no chance that the flu shot is going to give you the flu. All right. So next we are going to talk about shingles, and you may also hear this referred to as herpes zoster. And this disease is caused by a virus called varicella zoster virus, and this is the same virus that causes chickenpox. And so anyone that has had chickenpox can experience shingles, because what happens is your body does not actually get rid of the varicella zoster virus. The virus remains dormant in your body, and in the future it can reactivate. And it's not really clear or understood what causes reactivation. We do know that stress can bring it out, and so that's one of the risk factors. But it's not, that's not entirely clear. What are all the factors that are going to cause someone to have a reactivation of their varicella zoster virus? So kind of, of course, research is being done on this to try to better understand that. But when someone does have the virus become reactivated, they will get a painful rash that is made up of mostly blisters that end up filling with fluid. One of the symptoms is that this rash is very painful, and so unfortunately shingles can be a very painful disease because of how painful the rash is. And the blister will fill with fluid, and then over the ensuing weeks they will scab over, and then in about 2 to 4 weeks you'll have clearing of the rash. Along with the rash, some individuals may experience other symptoms like fever, headache, chills, upset stomach, those types of symptoms. So for some people, it's not just the rash, they also feel sick. One thing about the shingles rash is you're going to just see it on one half of the body. So here you can see it on this individual's kind of the side of their body underneath their arm. And then here you can see this woman, it's on her nose and kind of above her eye here. But it's only affecting, in both of these pictures, it's only affecting one half of the person's body. Another thing to be aware about with shingles is that there's a pretty common complication that occurs, and this is called postherpetic neuralgia. And it's going to affect about 10% of shingles cases. And what it is it's severe pain after the rash resolves. So the rash is gone, but the individual is still experiencing pain where the rash occurred. And this is going to be more common in individuals that are older. So it rarely occurs in individuals that are less than 40 years of age. And as you age, the risk of postherpetic neuralgia gets higher and higher. You know, for some, it's going to be more of a temporary issue where it will resolve over, you know, the ensuing weeks to months, but some can actually have pain for years. So this is certainly something that you want to try to avoid. So in terms of how big a problem shingles is really a big problem. There's an estimated 1 million cases of shingles that occur each year in the US. And almost 1 out of every 3 people are going to develop shingles during their lifetime. And what this graph is showing here is it's showing that you have an increased risk of both developing shingles as you age, and you also have a higher risk of developing postherpetic neuralgia as you age. So these different bars are representing decades of life. So the first bar is individuals in their 20s, the second is 30s, the third is 40s, all the way up to 80 and above. And you can see that these bars are really increasing in height as you move up these decades. So the light blue bars are indicating the rate of shingles, and then the dark portion of the bar is indicating the proportion of people that end up getting postherpetic neuralgia. So you can see that as individuals age, the risk of postherpetic neuralgia really increases substantially. You know, in your 20s, 30s, and even 40s, it's a low risk, but by the time you get to 80 and above, it's about more than 25% of people that are experiencing that. So definitely something that is something that older adults need to consider because of the higher risk as people age. So one thing I did want to just mention quickly is that shingles cannot be transmitted from one person to another person. What can happen is the varicella zoster virus can spread from a person with shingles to someone that has not had the chickenpox or the chickenpox vaccine yet. And the chickenpox vaccine, you can first receive that at 12 months of age. So when we're looking at the population of people who have not had chickenpox or the chickenpox vaccine, we're talking about young babies. And so this is another important reason why the older adult population really want to consider the shingles vaccine, because you don't want to put your grandchildren at risk that have not yet had chickenpox or the chickenpox vaccines. So the vaccine that is recommended for individuals against shingles is called Shingrix. Previously, so back in 2006, there was another vaccine that was first manufactured, and it's called Zoster. So some of you may have received Zoster. And that one used to be recommended, but now that committee that I told you about previously, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, they recommend Shingrix over Zostavax just because Shingrix, it works better. So it's just more efficacious. And Shingrix is going to be recommended for adults with normal immune systems that are aged 50 and older. You will require 2 doses, and those doses are going to be separated by a period of 2 to 6 months. Some questions that commonly come up about Shingrix are, if you've had shingles, should you get vaccinated? The answer is yes. So you can get shingles again. You know, most people are only going to have it once, but you can actually have it multiple times. And so even if you've had shingles previously, you want to get vaccinated so that you don't get it again. Another question is, if you've previously been vaccinated with Zostavax, the vaccine that was first recommended to against shingles, should I get vaccinated with Shingrix? The answer is yes. The one caveat is that you should wait at least 8 weeks. So if you've had Zostavax recently, which probably is probably not going to be a problem for the individuals that are on the call here, but that is the recommendation, that if you've had a recent dose of Zostavax, that you should wait at least 8 weeks until you get your Shingrix. And then another question that comes up is, if I have a chronic medical condition, should I get vaccinated? And again, the answer is yes. So some questions that you might have had. In terms of how well does Shingrix work? Well, it actually works really, really well. And so again, there's kind of a lot of numbers here, but what I want to draw your attention to is how well it works in individuals between the ages of 50 and 69. It's about 97% effective. So, you know, really good effectiveness for that age group. And then here we're looking at the effectiveness for individuals 70 and up, and that effectiveness is about 91%. So a little bit lower, but still an amazingly effective vaccine. And these numbers were generated from a really, really large clinical trial of over 30,000 people. So we do know this vaccine works really well. And that was the main reason that the ACIP decided that we're going to recommend Shingrix over Zostavax, just because it works better. It's going to protect people better. Now, all vaccines are going to have side effects, and some of the side effects that we see with Shingrix are very closely related to the ones that you see with other vaccines. For example, pain at the injection site, redness at the injection site, swelling. Some people will have body-like symptoms like muscle aches or tiredness, those types of things. But again, I think it's important to recognize that the side effects are going to be mild and they're going to be temporary. And so they're going to be a lot much easier to handle than actually dealing with the disease of shingles. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the pneumonia vaccine. And this is the one disease that we're talking about that's caused by a bacterial agent. So both influenza and shingles are caused by a virus, where pneumococcal disease is caused by a bacteria called Streptococcus pneumonia. And it can cause a variety of illnesses, not just pneumonia. It can cause more mild illness like ear infections and sinus infections, but it can also cause more severe disease like pneumonia or meningitis, which is a swelling of the coverings of your brain, or bacteremia, which means that the bacteria have spread throughout your bloodstream. But in terms of what the most common of the serious illnesses, it is pneumonia. And it's going to be spread from person to person via respiratory secretions, similar to how influenza is spread. So pneumococcal disease is another big problem in the United States. About 1 million Americans get pneumococcal disease every year. Hundreds of thousands of individuals get hospitalized and thousands of people die. And again, older adults are at higher risk of not only getting pneumococcal disease, but also having more severe disease. So younger adults can be at higher risk as well, but everyone that is 65 years of age and older is considered to be at higher risk. So we have 2 different vaccines that can protect us against pneumococcal disease. we have Prevnar 13, and we have Pneumovax 23. And there's many different serotypes of pneumococcal bacteria, and so those numbers are telling you how many it's protecting you against. It used to be recommended that older adults get both of these vaccines. Recently, the recommendation has changed so that older adults should be definitely receiving the Pneumovax, and all adults 65 years and older should receive 1 dose. And if you did receive a dose prior to age 65, you should be given another dose after 65, but just wait 5 years in between the doses. So everyone 65 years of age and older should be receiving the Pneumovax 23. Now, in terms of the Prevnar 13, this is a vaccine that can be considered for adults 65 years of age and older, but this is going to be a decision that's going to be made between the individual and their medical provider. The Prevnar 13 is the vaccine that is universally given to infants, and because it's been given to infants for a number of years now, we're no longer seeing these serotypes circulating in adult populations, because what's happening is we're preventing the pneumococcal disease in the children, and then they are no longer transmitting to adults. And so that's the reason why Prevnar 13 is not universally recommended anymore, but it is something that can be considered. But definitely Pneumovax 23, all adults 65 years and older should receive 1 dose. So pneumococcal vaccine is quite effective, not as good as the shingles vaccine, but better than the influenza vaccine. So about 60 to 70% effective in preventing invasive disease. So that would be like a bad pneumonia or a bacteremia where the bacteria has actually spread in the blood. We do see reduced effectiveness among immunocompromised persons, but if you have a normal immune system, the vaccine is going to be pretty effective in preventing invasive disease. Again, the side effects are going to be very similar to what we've already talked about. Redness at the injection site, swelling, pain at the site. Some people may experience mild fever or mild loss of appetite. But again, these side effects are going to be mild and they're going to be temporary. Okay, so quickly, I'm just going to talk a little bit about COVID-19. Many of you are probably already well versed in this just because there's been so much in the media about this. So you likely already know that older adults are more likely to get very sick from COVID-19, potentially leading to hospitalization and potentially the need for intensive care or a ventilator. And risk is going to be increased for people in their 50s and then continues to increase in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And again, these numbers written here may be hard to read, but what this is showing is it's showing weekly deaths per 100,000 population by age group. And this maroon color here is showing deaths among 80 plus. And the dashed pink line here is showing deaths among 65 to 79 years. And then this little bit lighter pink is among 55 to 64. And the other lines you can really hardly see because we're not seeing a lot of deaths in the younger age group, but we're seeing significant death in the older age groups among people that get sick with COVID-19. So the vaccine is especially important in our older adult population. So we have 3 vaccines that are authorized and recommended for use in the United States. These are probably all household terms for all of you now. We have the Pfizer-BioNTech, we have the Moderna vaccine, and we have the J&J or Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And the CDC does not recommend one brand over the other. The best vaccine to get is the one that is available to you first. And how well do the COVID-19 vaccines work? Well, they work really well, including for older adults. So, sometimes with older adults, we see that vaccines are less effective. That's something that we see with influenza vaccines, and that's why we have special vaccines for our older adults. But we find that the COVID-19 vaccines works really well for everyone, including older adults. So when we look specifically at adults 65 years of age and older, who were fully vaccinated with either the Pfizer, BioNTech, or the Moderna vaccine, that was 94% effective in reducing the risk of hospitalization. So basically, it's 94% effective in preventing severe disease in older adults. And so that's, the most important part. We want to make sure that people are not getting severely ill, hospitalized, and needing ICU care and ventilator support. So we're doing pretty well in the United States. We have over 150 million people that are fully vaccinated, which is awesome. Now, there are obviously some areas of the country where there's more people vaccinated and some areas of the country where there's fewer people vaccinated, but on average, we're doing quite well. And specifically in New York State, we're doing well. We have close to 70% of individuals that are 18 years of age and older that have received at least one dose. And we have over 60% of our population 18 years and older that are fully vaccinated. So, this is what is going to help us, get back to some semblance of normalcy in our communities is vaccination. So if you haven't yet gotten vaccinated for COVID-19, I recommend you do so to get yourself protected for you, for your family, for your community. And that's it. These are my 3 kids after their influenza vaccine last fall. So they're all vaccinated. My 12-year-old is in between her first and second dose for the COVID-19 vaccine. My whole family got COVID, and we also are vaccinated. So I'm happy to take any questions that anyone has.
Yes, we have a couple questions, but first, Shauna, thank you so much for that presentation and giving us all that information.
You're very welcome.
Let's see. So this first question, actually, I'm going to go out of order. So this one is, if you get the Shingrix vaccine, how long do you have to wait before getting the Pneumovax 23 vaccine?
So you don't have to worry about timing in terms of different types of vaccines, just because the Shingrix is protecting you against one particular condition, and the Pneumovax is protecting you against something else. So you don't have to worry about timing between those vaccines. But there is, like I said, if you are talking about the Zostavax and the Shingrix, you want to wait 8 weeks.
Okay, thanks, Shauna. Somebody's wondering can you tell if you have antibodies from a vaccine or from actually having the virus?
So there are tests that you can do to look at antibody status, and some people are doing that. Some people that, for example, that have had COVID-19 want to know, like, do I still have antibodies so that I can hold off on getting the vaccine? Or maybe if I have antibodies, should I not get the vaccine? And so there are tests available that can tell you whether or not you have antibodies present. And if you have antibodies present, then that means that you have had COVID-19. But what it can't tell you is whether or not you're going to be protected in the future. So the CDC is not recommending that you use those types of tests to determine your immune status or to determine whether or not you're going to get vaccinated. Once you do get vaccinated and you have antibodies, you're not going to be able to distinguish between the antibodies made from natural disease or the antibodies that are created due to getting the vaccine.
Okay, thank you. The last question I'm seeing here is, can you address the anti-vax movement? Any thoughts, any legitimacy, any advice on how to engage with people of this persuasion?
Oh boy, I feel like we could talk about this for the next 3 hours. So, my take on the anti-vax movement is that for the vast majority of people that are part of this movement, they think that they're doing the right thing for their children. They kind of have, sincerely held beliefs, either due to religion or due to kind of how they decide to live their lives, that vaccines are somehow harmful, or vaccines are, not are not natural, and not what God would want them to put into their bodies. So I do think that oftentimes the anti-vax community is vilified. But I do think that deep down they think they're doing the right thing. Because if you think about it, what parent doesn't want to do the best thing for their child? And so I think a lot of it just comes down to being misinformed, and the fact that there's kind of so many ways to get information that may not be true these days. It's also very easy to, especially on social media, if you're friends with other people that are of the same persuasion, you're basically just kind of confirming each other's suspicions. And so it kind of just it builds on it builds up. So I think that you hear this all the time, and that education is the best way. But I'll tell you that even some people that are educated, they're not going to change their minds. I mean, they're not. I mean, I think a good example is the measles outbreak that occurred in New York City. Now, some people clearly decided to get vaccinated because a lot of people were vaccinated during that outbreak. But I remember seeing an interview with a woman that had 5 kids, and all 5 of them got measles, and she still was, did not think the vaccine was a good idea for her children or family, just because she had these sincerely held religious beliefs. So I think that you have to recognize that there's a spectrum of vaccine hesitancy. So there's going to be some people that are hesitant, but they still get the vaccine. There's going to be some people that are hesitant, and so they maybe get some vaccines but refuse others. And then there's going to be some people that are very hesitant and don't get any vaccines. And then you kind of have the people that are kind of a little bit out in left field, and they kind of take it to these levels of conspiracy theory type things, like the fact that the COVID-19 vaccine is going to put a tracker in your body so the government can track you. So you kind of have this whole wide range of people that are kind of part of the anti-vax or vaccine hesitancy community. And I think where we want to target is we want to target those people that are on the fence. We want to target people that are thinking about vaccinating their kids, but they're just not sure, because those individuals are people that you could very potentially persuade if they have the right information and they're educated properly on the science of vaccines, and how safe they are, how effective they are, and really understanding some of the underlying reasons for the conspiracy theories that have emerged, like autism, like that kind of conspiracy theory, which is just, there's no basis in science or reality for that conspiracy, and yet it still continues. So I think that's where we want to focus our efforts, on those people that are persuadable. There's people that no matter what you do, you're not going to change their mind. So I guess I think, like, no matter what you tell me, I'm not going to change my mind about getting my kid vaccinated. So I know there's certainly people out there that are not going to change their minds about not getting their kids vaccinated.
Okay. Thank you, Shauna. Thank you for that information. We have just one more question that came in. Do you have time for that?
Sure.
Okay. So this is, why are they recommending the vaccine for children when tests are showing that a large number are getting heart issues? I'm not sure if that's referring to COVID-19 or what, but I'll pass it along to you.
Yeah, so what is being referred to is something called myocarditis. And so myocarditis is inflammation of the heart tissue. And myocarditis can be more mild, but myocarditis can also be more severe. So I think that the important thing to think about is that when you're thinking about vaccines, you have to think about the balance of the risk and the benefit. So no vaccine is 100% safe. No vaccine is 100% effective. So you just have to kind of go into that with that mindset. This is kind of the first, I would say, adverse event that has been recognized that there is some evidence that there is a link between the vaccine and myocarditis in children. But there have not been a lot of cases of this. I mean, there was an article that came out in Pediatrics, which described 7 cases in boys, and I think there's probably been around 300 cases altogether, which means that maybe 1 out of every 50,000 to 100,000 doses this is happening in. But what you have to keep in mind is that COVID-19 can also cause myocarditis. And so, and actually COVID-19 is going to be more likely to cause myocarditis than, or very likely, we're going to find that COVID-19, I mean, this still, the research has to be done and the math has to be done, but likely we're going to find that the risk of myocarditis with getting COVID-19 is actually higher than the risk of getting myocarditis with the vaccine if we do in fact find that there is a link between the vaccine and this condition called myocarditis. And so I think what we have to do is we have to think that, okay, so when you don't get the vaccine, it doesn't mean that you're taking away that risk of myocarditis. You're taking away the risk associated with the vaccine, but you're certainly not taking away any of the risks that are associated with COVID-19 itself. And COVID-19 has killed kids, hundreds of kids, but the vaccine has killed no kids. So it's always a risk-benefit analysis. What are the risks? What are the benefits? And then, but when we're looking at the COVID-19 vaccines, the benefits just substantially outweigh the risks.
Okay, thank you for that, Shauna.
You're welcome.
I'm not seeing any other questions. I'm just seeing thank you very much for this information. This was really helpful. Appreciate your time today. Thank you. So Shauna, thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. And thank you to everyone that joined in today. And hopefully you got something out of it and you can pass some good information on to your family and friends about how important vaccination is.
I think so. And I should be able to post the recording at some point this week if anyone wants to share it with anybody they think should watch it. So thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
All right. Bye-bye.